What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Hops Geek News. We are a podcast that talks about comic books, movies, TV shows, and of course, we typically talk about a beer that we're drinking as well. So if this is your first time joining us, hey, thanks for hanging out. We really appreciate that you coming by. You can find our episodes by going to our website, hopsnews.beer, where we write a lot of great articles. Lauren does a lot of great Disney related articles. I suggest comic books or something I'm reading each week. And then also you can find links to our episodes on every podcasting platform, or you can go ahead and search Hops News on every podcasting platform. In addition to that, we also do a live show where we talk about beer news on Thursdays at 8 p.m. Eastern. Feel free to check that out as well. Our social medias, Hops Geek News on Twitter, Instagram, even TikTok, even though I'm still trying to figure out why we're on TikTok at our ripe old age. And
hey, we're doing good. One of our recent videos is almost at 30,000 views. Woohoo,
that's right.
We made it.
We made it big time, you know. I can quit the day job and I'm going to be a full-time influencer mom.
Dreams do come true.
Dreams do come true. So all that said, normally we talk about news, what we're reading, what we messed up on the week before. However, we have a really special episode today with a very special guest that we are going to get to in just a minute. So this episode, Lauren, why don't you tell us what our unofficial beer sponsor, or they kind of are official ones, we can kind of say official for this brewery. So
yeah, if you were going to pick one brewery to truly represent our podcast, it would be Woodland Empire in Boise, Idaho. We've had the couple that owns the place. We've had them on 3 times on the podcast. They're an amazing couple, and Matt got to brew a beer with them. That's been like a year ago already, huh?
Last December, and it came out for their anniversary in January. Yeah. So I did get to brew. We had a donut geek named after Dunkin' Donuts because geeks, of course, the podcast. And then also the fact that I don't let anybody go 2 seconds without knowing that I love Dunkin' Donuts, being from Boston. And now I'm transplanted in an area that doesn't have a Dunkin' Donuts. So I'm lost.
I'm surrounded by them and I can't stand them. But we're drinking a fantastic beer. We're not drinking Dunkin' Donuts. It's their ADA County Stout, aged in whiskey barrels. It has raw cocoa and cold brewed oh my gosh, I can't speak tonight. Neckar coffee. It's fantastic. And we were both talking about it before we started recording. It's 14%. It is wicked good. I'm in Florida. I don't usually say wicked. It sounds silly when I say it.
It's just natural. It rolls off the tongue eventually. Don't worry.
You just stop feeling like disgusted with yourself the more you say it.
Just embraced at this point. All right. And I can't wait when I go to Disneyland down in LA or Anaheim in next month. Wow, that's next month. I'm going to be pounding Dunkin' Donuts like it's my job.
But because of our guest tonight, I actually poured it in my Spider-Man glass because we have some Spider-Man we're definitely going to be talking about in a little bit. And I know as we go, this is just going to warm up and be so much better because it's already a lot of chocolate and a lot of coffee coming through. And I know that whiskey is going to start to kind of come out. And they only do this once a year, right, Matt? Because you sent me this.
They do it once a year. Last year, they brewed it with maple syrup. This year, no maple syrup. They kind of change it up every year and they age it. I believe they've already brewed next year's batch and it's just sitting there aging now. And it's the warmer it gets, the greater it's going to get. It's 14%. So I'm going to be brave after this and continue on Stranger Things. But knowing me and my old man self, I'll probably be snoozing, but let's hope not.
Especially after a 14% whiskey barrel-aged beer. But speaking of whiskey.
Actually, hold on. I wish I had known you had that glass because I have the shirt that is that glass. So
it is an amazing glass.
It is.
For anybody who hasn't seen it, it's from glass to mouth, and it's the 3 Spider-Men pointing at each other.
It is.
And the other glass is Spider-Man getting a beer out of his beer fridge with his webs, and it looks like he's sitting at Jonah Jameson's desk. Maybe. I'm not sure what's
She's
going
had
on.
3 sips. Well, yeah. Speaking of Spider-Man, though, we have a special guest. Daniel Kibblesmith has agreed to come and join us. He has done a lot of fantastic work across comic books, TV shows. He's even been Emmy nominated. And thank you for taking the time to come and hang out with us. We really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm sorry, are we just going to breeze past glass to mouth? Does anyone want to take a second and congratulate them on that?
They saw their opening and took it.
What's funny is I posted it on Instagram and I tagged the company because it's a very small business and they make some amazing glasswork. And my dad privately messaged me and he's like, "Do you understand what that is and what they're saying?" And I'm like, "Yes, Dad, I'm 38 years old. I understand the reference.
Yeah, do you understand what that is, Dad?
Unfortunately, he did.
It sounds like it. Thank you for having me. I can't wait to check out Glass to Mouth. I can't wait to check out this beer. I'm very much a Dunkin' Donuts person. It sounds amazing. 14%. I don't know a lot about beer. 14% sounds very high to me.
It is.
For a beer, yes.
So it sounds like a nice little Stranger Things snooze is definitely in your near future.
Yeah, he's going to wake up at the end and have the whole thing ruined.
I know. Or my wife's just going to be like, "Are you sleeping?" And of course, I'm going to pull the whole no. And then I'm going to get hit with questions and not be able to answer them.
No. Where's Vecna? I'm watching the Vecnas.
No, he's going to wake up, run up that hill.
I'm like, yeah, like they're fighting the monster. She's like, that doesn't narrow it down at all. They've been doing that this entire season.
What season are we in?
4 seasons, yeah.
Oh, so yeah, really, really, really appreciate you coming on. One thing that we really like to ask before we dive into all of your amazing work is we got to know kind of what your geek origin story is. How did you become immersed in writing comics, or what was your first comic you remember grabbing as a kid that drew you into this world?
Sure. Well, I didn't like comics when I was really little. I liked the Superman cartoon. I think it would have been probably the Ruby Spears Superman cartoon. And then, there were like toys sort of around that time. I remember we had like these I think it was like Wendy's or Burger King had these drink cup holders that were sort of like little action figures that looked like I believe it was Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and Darkseid. Mm-hmm. I think that might have been a tie-in with the Challenge of the Super Friends. Mm-hmm. And then we had a little Captain Marvel, the Shazam Captain Marvel action figure that was just this very much like cheap plastic kind of one-off. So I knew that superheroes were around. And my dad was a big Marvel guy in the 60s and 70s, into the 80s. Like he sold his collection to buy a car so he could go to school, and kept a handful of Silver Age books, and then started buying again, when he had a job. So the stuff was around, but I didn't really spark to it. I was more into video games. Early mid 80s, 8-bit and 16-bit video games. It would have been for people my age. And I came to the characters largely through video games. We went to this. I've told this story a lot, and I always get very specific. It was the Fun Zone in Melrose Park Arcade by Triton College. It's not there anymore. I think it's a used bookstore or a textbook store now. And they had the 6-player wraparound X-Men arcade game, the one based on the Pride of the X-Men pilot, which I've now bought that like on PlayStation, so many times. I think if it's on Switch, I've bought it on Switch.
I definitely have it as well.
Yeah, of course.
For each system, because I have both systems, so I definitely have it for both systems.
So I have it on everything I own now, and I was so drawn to like the strangeness and the specificity of those X-Men characters and those X-Men designs, and Nightcrawler in particular, for being just so quirky and offbeat and not superhero-y in any way that I was familiar with in sort of 80s and 90s mainstream pop culture. So my dad saw his window. He was like, "Oh, you like Nightcrawler? I've got Excalibur #1. I bought it the other day." He
was like, "This is the moment I've been waiting for so long."
Exactly. And then after that, I was hooked. So always wanted to, write TV or movies or, make movies in some capacity as a child understands it. But read superhero comics after that, throughout my 90s childhood, and then fell off during kind of the end of the boom, fell off during like Clone Saga and Age of Apocalypse and all these things where the stuff that I liked was really being shaken up to keep up with the times. And I'm concurrently, reading all of these Silver Age books. like reading like Lee Kirby Fantastic Four and, Romita Spider-Man and all these things where I'm kind of experiencing the 60s and the 90s simultaneously. So when the 90s go like full 90s, the tether between those things that I like kind of got severed. So I fell off of superhero comics pretty much entirely. And then it wasn't until I was in like later, I'm making that sound like a big deal. It was probably like a 5-year window. It was a very short break, all things considered.
Feels long, but looking in retrospect.
Yeah, certainly at the time I was like, I don't like these anymore, and then I started hanging out with, like stoner kids in black t-shirts, and they turned me on to like, Fantagraphics and, Drawn and Quarterly and, Love and Rockets and James Kochalka, was one of my favorite creators of any kind on the planet. But also like Watchmen and Year One and Dark Knight Returns and Sandman and all the stuff that's like superhero or superhero adjacent that I didn't know about because there was this whole period of really important work between the 60s and the 90s, that nobody had like clued me into. And then I saw the bridge between the stuff that I grew up loving, the stuff that, I love more now from like a nostalgia point of view. But at the time I found like totally incomprehensible. Like the Clone Saga, like Age of Apocalypse. Now I'll like shovel that stuff directly into my brain. But at the time I was like, I don't really have very much money. Like I can't, I can't pay $1.75 for this thing that I have like no understanding of.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was
up quick.
It was. Yep, it's always funny, like looking back. So like that gap. So like Frank Miller really dominated the 80s with a lot of the stories he was doing and things like that. And so when you look back, or I even just recently was reading back between the Batman and Spawn that he did, and it's always funny reading those again because the dialogue is so vastly just in some regards like not bad, but it's such a time period that where if you pick up these comics and look at what they're saying, you're like, oh yeah, this is easily the 90s, or hey, this was the 80s, and they're still fun to read. It's really cool seeing how comic books have evolved over those time periods.
Yeah, it's very specific to him as well. And then my understanding of Frank Miller, Batman and Spawn, is that there's a personal Frank Miller canon for Batman, and that those are canonical in his mind.
Yes.
I should interrupt briefly. My air conditioning just came on. Is this ruining everything, or are we okay?
No, you can't hear a single thing. I didn't even notice. You're good. You're totally good. Plus, even if it was like living in Southern California, geez, air conditioning.
Oh, I'd rather keep it on. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, that's how I got back into it. And then when I went to film school in Chicago, where I'm from, I got a job as a projectionist, and the idea was that I would just watch all of the movies. I did watch a fair amount of movies, but honestly, it was so noisy up there, and the viewing window was so small and so awkwardly placed that it wasn't this like, cinema paradiso fantasy. What I actually had was a ton of free time to read all of the trade paperbacks that the other projectionists had brought in. So that's how I read like Sandman eventually, and basically all of Vertigo at that time.
So now my one hard-hitting question I always like to ask guests who work in the industry, Marvel or DC, if you had to pick just one?
If I had to pick just one, I'd pick Marvel. I mean, it feels so arbitrary and kind of dumb to have any kind of imagined rivalry in my head that I'm participating in. But it's just the one that came first. It's the one that was just the house that I grew up with. It's the closest thing to a religious point of view that, our house had growing up. There were just more Marvel comics around. I loved Superman and I loved Batman, the animated series, so much when I was a kid. Oh God,
those were amazing. Yeah.
I think in the 90s, it was like whether you were into comics or not, everybody watched Batman. Like, it was just,
it'd be on in prime time sometimes. Adults watched it. A movie came out in theaters on Christmas.
Yes,
it's incredible.
It was everywhere. Which for Batman, I know everyone knocks them, but I still love those Batman Forever and Batman and Robin movies. They hold a special place in my heart.
I haven't revisited them since this kind of like cultural second look has sort of come about. I listen to a lot of movie podcasts and comic podcasts, and I think that people with extremely good taste are like, no, these are very effective at what they're trying to do. And then my kind of quiet, grumpy holdout is like, I don't really agree with that. I think these are just kind of bad. I understand that they deserve a reappraisal and that there's merit to them, and a lot of this is just a matter of taste. But I think Batman and Robin is just a bad movie.
So I fully agree. Look, I am very self-aware that these movies are not quality, but for some reason they bring like joy because they don't take themselves seriously. They're stupid, like one-liners, like "You're not sending me to the cooler." Like I say that all the time. They're not great quality movies. I'm not going in there looking for an Oscar performance.
It's like, how many dad jokes can we put in one movie?
Exactly.
Right. They really go for it. I mean, look, there are goals here, and I believe those goals are being accomplished. I always think of I like the Burton ones more. I think I'm just a bigger Tim Burton fan than I am of Joel Schumacher. And Tim Burton is obviously like very consistent in his films, whereas Joel Schumacher is more varied and has kind of more like dips into mainstream. So it was much easier for me to grow up being a Tim Burton fan because I knew what that meant and looked like. Yeah. So I kind of love Batman Returns, especially on those merits. But I always think of Batman, the first Batman, as being the movie where Tim Burton worked with Michael Keaton and Alec Baldwin on Beetlejuice and said, "That's my Batman." And he meant Michael Keaton.
And he had to fight for it, too.
He had to fight for it.
Yes.
And then Batman and Robin is the movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger in it, not playing Bane. Not playing the guy with the huge muscles and the unplaceable accents. Like, no. Oh, no, that's the sad cryoscientist whose wife died. Oh, you thought that guy was going to be Bane? No. No, he's the brainy one.
Yeah, that's just like Arnold in Jingle All the Way, where he's like this mattress salesman.
Oh, you're my number one customer.
Dope. Yeah, like that is my all-time favorite Christmas movie. But we're supposed to believe that no, it's not Arnold running around. He's moved on from his Predator days, his Commando days.
It's so funny. It's something The Rock really figured out. The Rock was like, I'm going to be the biggest movie star in the world, and one of the secrets to that is that I'm never going to play like a regular person again because people just don't buy it.
You're right. Like The Rock himself is the person. Like that is what you're getting.
Yeah, I got to be some version of this icon in everything. I can't be like an insurance salesman.
No, he's never had like a normal role, has he? It's like
it's been a long
at one
time.
Point.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
His early days.
Yeah, he flirted with like
when he had a fanny pack.
Is there a movie where he had a fanny pack?
There was
peanut butter and halibut.
No, there's some picture where he's wearing like a turtleneck. It's a black turtleneck.
The
fanny pack.
Yeah, with the sweet lean. Yeah.
Yes.
No, that's quite cool. We actually, when I was writing Quantum and Woody for Valiant, they did a series of meme-inspired covers, and we have a Quantum and Woody cover where Quantum in a mask, in the Quantum mask, is wearing that outfit and is in that pose.
That is amazing.
Farewell, yeah.
Oh,
that's everything.
That's worth tracking down. There's a Batman and Robin slap cover as well that I think is very funny. It was my business card for a long time.
Oh, that is so cool. That is so rad. Oh, man.
That is so cool.
Well, so you go all this, you decide you want to write. And so you end up where you got your start kind of at Groupon.
Yeah.
And what did that entail? Because to me, Groupon is just like, hey, you can get 50% off this, 80% off this. Like what did that entail as far as working for Groupon?
I mean, that's correct. Like you're describing the service that the website provides. I was there at the very beginning, and the bosses were kind of like, they were young, and they were guys with senses of humor, especially in that sort of very like Adult Swim, kind of Tim and Eric. We all liked that stuff, and they recognized that their company could very easily become the sort of generic corporate behemoth. And they wanted to have in like their internal marketing and their outward facing stuff, they just wanted to have like wacky stuff going on. So most of what I did for Groupon was me and a handful of other really talented comedians and writers. And by the way, they employed every comedian in Chicago at that time. At some point, there will be like a book or an oral history about all the Chicago improvisers working at Groupon. But I met my friend Sam Weiner there, and he and I eventually wrote a humor book together called How to Win at Everything, which is really funny, and you can probably get it for a penny on Amazon. Like one of those like pay for shipping scams. I highly recommend you pay 1 penny for my book. But we would write fake articles to go at the bottom of the deals, and the idea was that these like short, McSweeney's style pieces would make the deals more viral, and then you would forward them around if there's like a 50% off at a spa. And then we wrote, the top 10 dangers of your toenails growing too long if you don't go to the foot spa. I mean, honestly, that's like more relevant than they usually were. They got like really off base after a while. But it was fun. We made a day calendar out of them at one point. And then the job eventually evolved into this sort of all-purpose in-house marketing thing. And we did a kind of an ARG for the employees, as a morale or team building exercise that all these like crazy steps in it. And at one point we threw a cooler in the river and they had to fish the cooler out, and inside of the cooler were stuffed dogs and a knife, and you had to cut open the dogs. But there were blood packs inside of the dogs. So if you cut into the stuffed animal, real blood would come out. And then there's a laminated business card inside one of the dogs that got them to the next step. It was like, it was really, really cool. My friend,
is the next step like 1 hour of free therapy?
Yeah, sure. I think it was probably necessary. But my friend Colin Crawford, who I went on to work with at Clickhole and at the Colbert Show, he came up with a lot of it, including programming like a very advanced at the time, sort of like a proto Twine game for this old iMac computer that we set up. It was a really crazy day job to have. But what it did was introduce me to a lot of really talented and disciplined comedians, and kind of turned us into not a capital C comedy room the way that you would for a TV show or something. But when The Onion moved to Chicago, we were all people with good resumes and qualifications, having been in this kind of adjacent comedy-ish office job, and having networked with each other, obviously. So from Groupon, I ended up freelancing at the Onion when it was Chicago-based, and that eventually morphed into working for Clickhole.
Oh, that's pretty neat. I never knew the history into Groupon at all. Like I just knew it was there, and then it kind of appeared. So that's really cool getting to dive in behind the scenes, kind of, and all the crazy things that went on there. That's super rad.
Yeah, it was fun, and I really appreciate that my bosses created these positions, that they gave us jobs doing the craziest stuff that they could think of. I mean, you can look at that in another lens and be like, this was a startup company burning a lot of money, but I got to keep some of the money. So, I liked getting a paycheck.
That's a win.
Yeah, I liked having health insurance.
So going from Groupon to late night to Deadpool, like how did that progress? Like how did you get more into the comic book industry and I guess more the entertainment and less Groupon?
Well, even before I was working at the Colbert Show, I was very active on Twitter and going to cons and trying to like drum up freelance and sample pages. And I, would try to rope
like me right now.
I mean, everybody, right? That's the path. And I would, try to get, right. So even before I was working at the Colbert Show, I was talking to every comic book editor on Twitter, and I found one who I don't know if he lived in Chicago or was just there a lot, but Alejandro Arbona, who had worked at Marvel and was at that time working at Valiant, and he and I became friendly, and he hired me to do some humor pages, like some gag strips in Bloodshot number 25. It was coming out at that time. And then he edited an all humor issue of the Unity series for Valiant. I believe it was also number 25, where he got like crazy, comedy geniuses like Michael Kupperman and Tom Sharpling to do stuff in it, and me, which I was very grateful for. And from there, I kind of had my eye on Quantum and Woody, and it hadn't been relaunched in a while. So I ended up getting Quantum and Woody at Valiant as my first long form. Nice. And we only lasted about 5 issues or 6 issues or something like that. And in the intervening time, I also co-wrote a creator-owned property called The Doorman with my friend writer Elliot Rahal and everything artist Kendall Good. Kendall did like colors and letters. He's incredibly talented, and criminally underused. I keep telling people to hire Kendall, please. So we'd had stuff come out, and then when I got to working at the Late Show with Stephen Colbert, Marvel and Colbert have a sort of a relationship and fondness for each other. People can go watch the Colbert Report appearance of Joe Quesada, where he hands over Mark Grunwald's shield, which is still part of the Late Show sets. I've touched it. It's very weird to get access to it. That is awesome. It's very cool. It's like, wearing Abraham Lincoln's hat or something. So at that time I was doing Quantum and Woody, and I wrote one like kind of tryout script for Harley Quinn, ended up doing a Harley Quinn short in another anniversary issue. I think it wasn't issue 25. It was like a 25th anniversary of the creation of the character.
It was a 25th anniversary. Yeah. Yep.
And between that and just being really visible on Twitter and having TV credits, then Marvel editors started contacting me. And my Marvel tryout was, and I think this is perfect, Lockjaw, a character that truly you can do no wrong. If it's a bad Lockjaw comic, nobody's going to care. They're going to be like, yeah, of course it's bad. It's Lockjaw. It's just a joke, right? You're just doing it as a goof. And then if it turns out good, which I think it did, in no small part thanks to the artist, Carlos Villa, then it's a pleasant surprise. And Marvel lets you do more. So that was my foray into like the big two, you know. And then from there, it's been it's been sporadic but consistent, if that makes sense. I don't write comics full time, and I usually have a television job going, but I do it as often as I can, as often as I'm asked. Really, I don't pursue stuff too aggressively, but I say yes to almost everything. So if anybody's listening and you own IP that you think that I can have fun with, I'll probably do it. if you're looking for somebody with a resume similar to mine, I'm always excited to talk to editors about the stuff that they want to do, and I just try to do as much of it as possible.
So when Marvel reaches out, do they tell you like, this is the character we want you to write about, and this is somewhat of the idea, or do they just say, hey, we want a comic book about this character? You got any ideas?
It's kind of both. I mean, it depends on the project. I've brought them a lot of stuff, but the first few were very collaborative. I've worked primarily with Will Moss and Sarah Brunstad, and they were amazing editors. And they would bring me characters and like seeds of ideas, or they would say, this is where we are in continuity right now. How do you think this character would react? So my first ongoing with Marvel was Loki 2019. Yes. And that was very much a case of like, this is the status quo after War of the Realms. Loki is king of Jotunheim. And that's the jumping off point. And then there's going to be a Loki series. What do you think would happen? And my first thought was like, well, he won't enjoy being king. He's going to do a poor job. He's going to leave immediately, because Loki is about, getting the thing. and pursuing the thing, not about governance.
Right.
He doesn't know what to do once he gets that thing.
Right. It's chaos, and it's the pursuit, and it's the chip on his shoulder about not having it. But I think that it just depends on the project. I brought them a lot of stuff. The stuff that I bring them, sometimes they like it, but the nature of continuity is just that whoever I'm excited about might be dead or in space, or, the cliche.
Dead or in space. I mean, it's a typical problem.
Or just getting like a new number one. You know what I mean? Like, I've noticed that so-and-so's been off the shelf for a while, and they're like, yes, that is because that comes out next month. So...
well, I saw not long ago you had a Darkhold release with Wanda. So with that coming out, and I read the description of that, that sounds amazing, where she calls in all the people and then they all kind of go crazy because they've touched the Darkhold. So was there any inspiration for the films or from the comic, going either way with everything that's going on in the MCU? Like, was that like, hey, we should talk about this because it's showing up in the MCU finally, even though it was in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. years ago, and we're pretending that didn't happen? I'm not bitter.
Well, so that's like a yes and no, right? Because one of the most common questions I get asked is like, is the MCU dictating what happens in the comics? And I understand why people would ask that, because you get things like Spider-Man has organic web shooters in the Sam Raimi movie, and then he gets organic web shooters in the comics. Or like they kind of come up with a crazy long lost son to be a Nick Fury who looks like the one in the movies. And I to my knowledge, it's not that like they get a phone call from Hollywood and they're deferential to what's going on in the MCU. But I think that the editors are smart and they understand that, what's the line, right? Like every comic could be somebody's first comic. Every comic could be somebody's favorite comic. And they want people who fall in love with the movies to be able to buy something that is passingly recognizable. Like my take on Loki was very much like, oh, Tom Hiddleston could play this Loki. I'm not doing exactly movie Loki, but I want to do a Loki that movie fans would recognize and appreciate. But no one ever told me make it like the movies. I mean, somebody else made Loki hot. Loki wasn't always hot. that happened. That happened in the comics before I got there. That happened during Young Avengers. So they're correlated with each other. They mirror each other and they dance with each other. But if the comics were subservient to the movies, then they'd be like very straightforward, and they're not. Comics are as crazy as they've ever been.
Oh yeah.
So I think it's a question that answers itself when you start kind of pulling at the threads. As for Darkhold, so my issue is a alternate universe tie-in about Blade. So it has nothing to do with the MCU, but it is totally my love song to Blade 1998.
Yes. The alternate. Oh yes.
So everything I do in that comic is just like a what if the Blade movie had ended differently, and it spins into this sort of like cyberpunk, like Blade Runner, bisexual lighting, purple and cyan future, about Amadeus Cho trying to be a good vampire in a world where there are no mutants, there are no Inhumans, there are no superheroes. Everybody has been turned into a human or a vampire. It's just a sort of all vampire reimagining of the Marvel universe in one issue of Blade.
Which is amazing because a lot of people, Blade can pretty much be accredited to the reason why the MCU even exists today. So like having that love letter too is just, it's beautiful. It is such a glorious thing because a lot of people don't recognize Blade. Everyone's like, oh yeah, Blade, there's movies and Wesley Snipes. And I know we're supposed to get a new one coming out soon, but this really is like, if you're tracing back to the roots of what we have today, it starts here.
Yeah, I agree. It's the Big Bang.
Yeah, but when people think about the first big Marvel movie, think X-Men or Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. And a lot of people are going to know that, since we're getting an MCU Blade, now people are going to be like, oh, because I feel like the average person does not realize that. And I think the average person also, I know before I got into comics and everything, they don't realize that comic books have vampires and all these, other mythical creatures.
Right.
Like it was just superheroes.
Yeah. Right. Well, Thor should be a clue, but yeah, you're totally right that it's people assume, Superman, Batman, they don't know like, oh, it's got it all. There's cowboys. Yeah.
Right. Well, Thor was always like, oh, well, he's a god. That's Norse mythology. He's like Zeus, so. Yeah. It'll be fun to kind of dig into all this.
Totally agree with you. I mean, I think that at the time, and you can see from the X-Men movie, one, what a huge influence Blade is on the X-Men movie stylistically and in terms of getting this stuff to kind of go down smooth. They've got a whole joke about how they don't wear superhero costumes. They wear black leather, and Blade wears black leather, and the Matrix wears black leather. And the degree to which Blade, I don't think you can overstate the way that Blade was this bridge for what can be considered cool in mainstream culture, because there had always been action movies and vampire movies and supernatural action movies. And Blade was the first thing that legitimized a comic book to that mainstream audience, to go from whatever transformations Blade had to, he doesn't wear the yellow sunglasses, right? Like he doesn't have a wooden stake in his hand. Like they invented a Blade that worked in movies, but the fact that he had the comic book in his DNA, like, Wesley Snipes and David Goyer and Stephen Norrington. Yeah. All the creators are the shepherds of this idea that like, no, these things can be cool. And not necessarily like badass. Obviously, Blade is the badass version of cool. But, Tony Stark, as played by Robert Downey Jr., like is very cool, but he's not badass the way a 90s vampire hunter is badass.
No, he's not wielding blades and things like that. Like he's badass in a different way.
In a funny way.
Yeah, but in a way that is like palatable to mainstream audiences. And I think Blade really was like the very, very thin wedge that opened the window where it's like, okay, we know you like this kind of thing. What if we told you it was based on Marvel Comics? And what if drip by drip by drip by drip by drip, we eventually got you to accept a raccoon and his tree friends who drive around in a spaceship together listening to rock and roll music.
Well, he made fun of it as it went. Yeah. But I think the difference between Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man and Wesley Snipes' Blade was more selfless, whereas Robert Downey Jr., until he got to the end of Endgame, he was more selfish, and he was admittedly so. So I think it's just, his character needed to evolve more, whereas I feel like Blade never really cared enough about himself.
Blade doesn't evolve. You're totally right. No, well, movie Blade has no arc.
Yeah.
I mean, movie Blade's arc is kind of like he has trauma surrounding his mother, but I mean, he barely remembers her and doesn't really know.
Book character doesn't.
Yeah, good call. That's a really good point. No, Blade is merely Blade.
Yeah, his whole goal is to, there's vampires. I'm going to kill them. I'm the Daywalker. Let's go. That's all there is to it. There's nothing more behind Blade at all.
No, but it works. I worked with Alex Hirsch, the creator of Gravity Falls, and he used to talk about how the beginning of the first episode of Pokemon is this like stupidly straightforward thing where the narrator says, "This is Ash. He catches Pokemon," and Ash is like, "I'm Ash. I catch Pokemon." It's like he wants to catch all of them, and then Ash is like, "That's true. I want to catch all of them." And that's Blade. He's got to catch them all.
Yes. Oh man. Yes. Oh, so we're going from Blade to, you have an upcoming comic coming out, The Amazing Spider-Man number 900, where you co-wrote with Dan Slott and Zeb Wells. How do you go from writing something like a love letter to Blade to now you're writing an issue of Spider-Man of all people?
Sure. I mean, I'm glad you phrased it that way, because this is still a love letter. Like, obviously I love Spider-Man. I've been trying to get crack at 616 Peter for a long time. So this is my third Spider-Man story. I did a Spidey story for an all ages graphic novel where he becomes an Instagram influencer, and he has to fight Mysterio. Mysterio is putting QR codes on all of the branded content that turn people into zombies. It's not.
Oh my goodness!
It's not subtle. It's for little kids, so it's not subtle. And then I got to do a Marvel Comics Presents. That was this was totally the editor's pitch, but I was very excited to do it. They were doing what if stories throughout the decades, and one of them was what if Peter Parker saw Star Wars in the 70s? Because he would, right? Like Johnny Romita, Spider-Man would have seen Star Wars at that time. So I got to script.
Yeah,
I got to script that story, but I'd never done 616 Peter. And I just got a phone call out of the blue from Nick Lowe saying, "Would you be interested in something like this?" And he had the seed of an idea, and I don't want to spoil it, but it's based on real news in New York. It's a real news story in New York that's either happened already or it's going to happen in the near future. But yeah, it's just a change that's been announced in the city. And in Nick's mind, it was like such a perfect fit for Peter Parker. He's like, this is going to affect his life. Do you want to do a backup story for it? And I said, yes, 100%, absolutely. Hadn't written for Marvel in a while, wanted very much to write 616 Peter Parker, and asked him, like, so where's this going to be? Like, is this going to be like, like an Infinity comic or, something on the app, or like a Pizza Hut? Well, what I'll definitely say about it is it's just a huge honor for my first crack at that version of Peter Parker, like the, quote unquote real version of Spider-Man, to also be in a big celebratory issue is just incredibly exciting for me.
Yeah, and it's an all-star writing team. The artwork looks great, and I'm excited. It comes out July 27th. So I know I already have it ready to go in my box when it drops, because this is Spider-Man's a character that my son and he loves. That's his character. So we bond over Spider-Man, because for 6 years old, what 6-year-old doesn't get into Spider-Man as a kind of their first introduction almost? Although we've talked X-Men, it seems like everybody's is X-Men, but his is Spider-Man. So I'm very excited to dive into this and get to read how you guys just bring everybody into the fold in the story. Yeah,
I will not spoil anything. Honestly, I don't know if this has been announced publicly yet, but I just want to say it. Mine is drawn by David Lopez. He did an amazing job. Big fan of his Captain Marvel stuff. So great at action, but also the acting and the comedy and the characterizations, facial expressions and stuff. I just really, really, really appreciated his work.
Nice. It is. I'm so excited. It's like a dream come true to kind of, like you mentioned, of all the things, you've worked on, to finally be like, I've always wanted to work on this particular thing. And now it's, hey, I got to work on this particular thing. This is great.
It's wild. Yeah. It's bucket list stuff. It's like touching that shield. It's like, I shouldn't have access to that.
Like stuff you can only dream of. And now it's so cool to see. And in regards to comic books and TV writing, how hard is it for you then to go from writing, TV to then being like, oh crap, I have to go write comic books now? Like, is there any sort of difficulty to kind of shake the rust off at all? I mean,
only in as far as like, I'm very tired, like there was a time before we had our kid, there was a time when I was really trying to burn the midnight oil and just do as much as humanly possible. Another crazy opportunity I had was that I was the writer of the ABC special celebrating Stan Lee, which was a live event in a theater that was also cut into a primetime special with like celebrity interviews and stuff. And to the extent that it was written, I was the writer of that. I helped the speakers with things. And that is the most tired I've ever been. Cause I did have a job at that time. And that was not my full-time job. I was doing my full-time job on top of that. And I think that I had comics going as well. So that was like a few weeks of getting maybe like 2 to 3 hours a night.
Oh, wow.
For a while. So now that we have a kid, I can divide my day into the job. I mean, TV writing is currently the job, and then the comic books is something that is a lot of people's job, but I'm doing part-time. And then there's stuff like exercise and hygiene. And I have found that comic books are always at war with exercise and hygiene. That yes. I would rather be getting the opportunity to write these characters, these other bucket list characters, than sleeping or taking care of myself. So it's become.
That's why I got the Peloton right here.
Yeah.
It's like, where do you find the time?
Yeah, it's become something. It's become something that I just have to be really disciplined about, so that I can honor my commitments and be present for my family and be a whole human person.
Yeah.
But it's not really hard shifting gears, because it's just the jobs are pretty different, especially with television. Like the group that you're collaborating with is usually much larger. The characters are not rooted in your brain the same way as, say like Spider-Man, like somebody that, almost everybody kind of knows inside and out. Mm-hmm. So I always say it's like playing Zelda versus playing Mario Kart, right? Like you're holding the controller, but your brain is doing like very different things.
I like that analogy. As somebody who plays all those games, and I still regularly video games, so it's like switching between sports and the RPG or what have you, then that's a really good way of putting it as well.
Yeah, if you can only see the person playing, it looks the same. But if you can see the screen, it looks wildly different.
Exactly.
So I have one more question though about, because you've written some amazing characters: Lockjaw, Harley Quinn, Deadpool, Blade, like we discussed. Going from because you have to be in the head of these characters. So do you have a hard time going from character to character? And do you have any characters that are almost easier to write because maybe you relate to them more?
That's a great question. Blade is really hard to write. I very purposefully wrote a story where Blade is kind of the boogeyman to this vampire planet. And there's no first person narration from Blade until he accomplishes his goal. And without spoiling anything, in my intent, the idea was that you were sort of watching Blade become the version of Blade that would have like an ongoing series in this world, if that ongoing series existed. It was kind of like an origin story where he went from being this cipher where he was somebody who was chasing you like Michael Myers, to him accomplishing his goal and kind of leveling up in that way, and then becoming the protagonist. Not to get like too artsy fartsy about it, but that was a way that I wanted to approach Blade, because I think that especially movie Blade, which this was a tribute to, is such a cipher. He doesn't have like a lot of interiority. Like we were saying, he's very much like mission oriented. He doesn't really make jokes. Blade 2 has a couple like fun ad libs in it, but
very dry.
He's very dry. So I think in some ways Blade is hard to write, or at least he is hard to write the way that you would write Peter Parker, who is nothing but like his brain is going a mile a minute. His interior monologue is so nonstop that it spills out of his mouth in bursts of nervous energy. I think that Lockjaw is hard to write in as far as he is a dog. But we approached it by having really clear goals for him, at least, clear in our mind. And eventually those goals get revealed to D-Man, who is sort of like the Doctor Who companion, point of view character that we stapled onto Lockjaw so that you could have somebody who's speaking out loud. So I think that the trick, especially as a comedian, is that you want people to be funny who are funny in the comics. You don't just want to make everyone funny. And if you do make people funny, you don't want them all to be funny the same way. So I wasn't inclined to give Blade a bunch of one-liners, but I made Loki very sassy because I felt that that's who he was.
He's sassy, all right.
Yeah, that's well within his character.
I felt that was well within his character. And I think, it's hard. Like, I've never written like a big ensemble team book, and criticism that team books get, whether they're very quippy or whether they're very dry. You read like Justice League in the 60s and everybody sort of just has the same voice. like Hawkman and Green Lantern both kind of just speak with this sort of like authoritative, like here's what has to happen next. And that's one of the reasons the Marvel Revolution was the Marvel Revolution, because you had the Fantastic Four and all of their personalities were totally crystallized. Yeah. And you put any two of them in the room and you have a different comic book. So I've never really been tested, and I'd like to try and have the opportunity to succeed or fail. But I've never really been tested on like a big ensemble book where I had to be extremely cautious about everybody speaking in character at all times. And if you do something like that, it helps to have the funny one. It helps to have kind of a lightning rod where like Spider-Man on the Avengers gets to be, or Deadpool when I wrote Deadpool versus Black Panther, which is a good example of like these. I know what these characters are. Black Panther is going to more or less be the straight man in this because their personalities are so clear, and that's one of the real joys, and also kind of one of the real cheats of writing characters that have been around for 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years, is that you know what they would do. Like, I've never seen Black Panther and Deadpool in a conflict together for 4 entire issues, but I knew how it would go because I know those guys.
Right.
Exactly. That makes a lot of sense. Picture
Black Panther lecturing Deadpool and Deadpool making jokes.
Right.
Is a character like Deadpool, especially because, Ryan Reynolds has brought him to life multiple times now and has made it hilarious. Is it hard to make him funny? Because I've read Deadpool comics that were funny, and I've read some that it seemed like they were trying too hard to be funny. So did you feel like the jokes went quick from brain to pen, or did you kind of have to become more of a smartass?
Right. My Deadpool is hilarious because I'm hilarious. That's I had to say that.
That's perfect.
I had to.
Perfect.
I'm sorry. I could not resist that. No, I think
that's something Deadpool would say.
It is. Yeah. No, I love writing Deadpool. I love writing Loki. Like, I think that I like writing characters who are inherently anti-authority. Whether that's a real authority or an imagined authority, or just like the idea of decorum. I like writing the sort of like rebel without a cause. What else you got?
My language.
Yeah, sort of characters.
That's
ones that refuse to admit they can be a hero and try not to be a hero, but sometimes end up being a hero. But sometimes are a villain.
Oh yeah, I mean, certainly that's Loki and Deadpool, and and then you get to issue 5 of anything that I write, and they're revealed to be very sad. They're also revealed to secretly be going through some stuff because who isn't, right? I mean, humor is a defense mechanism.
Who isn't? That's how I cope with everything, is humor. So,
I think you even made the comment before when you were comparing, DC to Marvel, where everybody started to fall in love with Marvel because it became more relatable. It wasn't just Clark Kent and Bruce Wayne, who are very unrelatable characters, even though they're very beloved.
But certainly at that time, they were just approached entirely differently. It was just apples and oranges.
Now they're more relatable. Yeah, definitely. But yeah, they are more so now than they were back in the day. Watch what's the one? Christopher Reeves.
Yeah, that's fair. Christopher Reeves is Superman, all that. Yeah, 78.
Even everything. Michael Keaton, everything rolled off his. Well, I mean, he's my favorite Batman, but everything just rolled off his shoulders. Like, he didn't let things get him down in the dumps.
That's the power of money, baby. when you're rich and also able to beat criminals to a pulp.
And like in Michael Keaton's Batman's case, like kind of a lunatic as well.
Oh yeah, he was absolutely a psychopath. Yeah. You want to get crazy. But my last question before we go ahead and wrap up here is, for anybody who's looking to start writing, who wanted to write a comic book, break into journalism, TV shows, any of that world, what advice would you give to that person that's looking to get a start somewhere?
Sure. I mean, everybody always says the same thing, and it's because it's true. It's just make something finished and show it to people. And I think what I'll add to that is be very egoless about criticism. Try to share ownership of everything you're doing with the people that you're co-creating it with, and really recognize their contributions. I think that that's something that writers, especially writers just getting started, sometimes struggle with, is that this is a visual medium and the artist is a co-writer and storyteller, and you really need to give them the space to do what they can do that you cannot do, because their contributions are what's going to make it sell. You know, there's a reason that the covers are facing outward. There are plenty of rock star writers who have devoted followings, and, you know, I buy tons of books based on my favorite writer doing it. But just broadly speaking, I think recognizing your lane and staying in it is really important. So I would say just make the thing, but make it in a respectful way that helps you build a community, because you're going to keep working with those people indefinitely. Yeah. I mean, if you achieve anything great, it is because you'll be achieving it together. And it's not hard to prove that. You know, you can just look at any the Invincible cartoon looks like the Invincible comics. It's not like, it's not like Robert Kirkman's Invincible with like a brand new art style. You know, like if you do something like that, it's going to come from, you guys working together. I don't know if that's the best analogy, because Invincible has had like different iconic artists on it. But
well, the one thing, and this is totally off point and not on a tangent, but the one thing that drives me nuts about it being the exact same artwork is because I've read the whole comic. Sometimes I'll think about something and I'm like, crap, was that the show or the comic? Because they mixed up a few things, but because the art's exactly the same, I'm like, I picture the art in my head and I'm like, I don't know.
Right. I don't have that problem with The Boys currently. Because I remember what Derek Robertson drew versus what Dennis Quaid got up to.
Yeah.
Well,
there's a very distinct. They've done a really good job with the show, building off of what they have, which is a whole other tangent, because that's currently my favorite like comic book medium TV show that is out right now.
It's very, very good.
It's insane how they're taking the source material and building upon it, and then that tension,
especially that source material. Like, I was reading that comic was just so.
Well, I was like, I'm ready for this to end, just because it's stressing me out, not knowing where they're going to go. So I'm like, I need that stress to end almost. So that's just a hats off to the writers, and
very impressive. And creating a mainstream hit out of something that is really seems designed solely for comic book readers.
Yeah,
it's on every level. It's an incredible feat. I'm in awe of that show.
This season's been absolute perfection.
Where can they go next? I don't know, but
I need more, and I need it now.
Yeah, I do. The finale is this coming. Anyways,
I think I'm going to reread it when it ends, because I'm going to be like in a state of like I need more.
But as we wrap up here, Daniel, thank you so much for coming on, hanging out with us, talking comic books. Go ahead. If people have been living under a rock and somebody is like, who is this guy? Where can they find you? Where can they find your work and all that good stuff?
Sure. I'm at kibblesmith.com. I update my website when I update my website. It's not never, which is an improvement, but it's when there's news. I'm at Kibblesmith on social media. I'm trying to use it less. I'm failing.
Same.
And I have a newsletter at Substack that mirrors the content on the website. So, it's really just whatever you're doing already. I'm also there, and you feel free to say hi.
Absolutely. And really, again, can't thank you enough for agreeing to come on. It has been a joy, a lot of fun, and it's always great getting to talk. Everybody has something different to say, whether they work, do you think that, they all work in comic books TV, they're going to say the same thing, but no, it's really interesting getting to hear everybody's backstories. And then, hey, this is how we came up and came through. So there's a journey behind everybody, and getting to hear their stories and share it is really great. So thank you for taking the time to even just come here and share that.
Thank you for having me. This was a blast. I'll just say something that no other creator was. Batman is terrible. Batman's a bad character.
Oh, no.
No one else has ever said that on this show.
No, that's one of his favorites.
No, I don't. Obviously, I don't believe that.
Spicy.
Well,
that's
the
okay.
DC versus Marvel question is always, I'm Marvel, he's DC, so it's always like a competition. Like, which way are they going to go?
sure.
Well,
I won this round.
Fair too, also, I did just put out, so I do write, real quick plug, I write for Dork Side of the Force, and I just put out an article, very sacrilegious, that was, should they revisit the original trilogy with all the new characters they're adding, things like that, and people did not like that. But it's, hey, that's what you gotta do these days, right? So,
you throw it out there,
Exactly.
and you get your feedback really fast.
Exactly. All I did was, hey, should we remake these movies? I know it's sacrilegious, but we have all these new characters, and so like, yeah.
And everyone said,
today that
no.
What we need a live action like Rebels. And I saw someone today say that Billy Butcher gave them Zeb vibes, and I would love to see a live action Rebels with Billy Butcher or Carl Urban as Zeb. That would be amazing.
This is where I'm fully out of my depth. I talked to all of my Star Wars comics friends like Jody Houser and Charles Soule, and I truly don't know anything. I like characters in Star Wars. I like all the robots. I like all my robot friends. But this is where it's like, I've seen the thumbnail for the Bad Batch. I don't know what that is.
I've seen the thumbnail.
I do not know what that is. Not because I'm not judging it. I just don't live in Star Wars world.
Right.
This is all Star Wars bonus content now.
That's very true. We are as Star Wars is one of my all-time favorite properties. We are living good, and just like we are across DC, Marvel, like we're getting a Miss Marvel TV show that's out right now. So as nerds, as fans growing up, picking up that X-Men comic book, picking up that Batman comic book, we are living very well right now.
It's a fun time, man.
Spoiled. It is. So as always, go ahead. If you like Star Wars, go ahead and find me writing and contributing to dorksideoftheforce.com. You can find my articles there. And Lauren and I like to write a bunch of articles for our website, hopsnews.beer. Our episodes come out weekly. Hopsnews.beer is our website. Hopsgeek News is where you can find us on all of our socials. And once again, thank you so much for joining us. We will see you guys next week. Cheers, friends.
This has been a Hops News production. You can find Hops News on all your favorite podcasts and social media platforms at Hops News. Cheers.